They hung her on hooks, arms stretched above her head, blood dripping onto the cold concrete floor. But she didn't scream. She didn't even blink. One of the guards leaned in to whisper, only to freeze. He'd seen those scars before. Not new wounds, not fresh agony. These hooks had been there once already. The silence was deafening, not from fear, but from confusion. Who was this girl? Why did her eyes hold no panic, no plea? Just a quiet, dreadful stillness, as if pain was an old friend. Her name was Aria Vale, and by the end of this story, the world would know her not as a victim, but as a storm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It began in the coastal slums of Valmere, a forgotten port city, known more for its smuggling routes than any map. No birth certificate ever bore Aria's name. She was born in the back room of a rundown textile factory, where her mother stitched clothes for pennies, and her father was a shadow no one ever met. Her first cries were drowned out by the hum of sewing machines and the scent of diesel. By age 5, Aria learned how to hide, how to flatten her breath in crawl spaces, how to read the silence before a boot struck a doorframe. She wasn't just poor, she was invisible. The children in Valmere grew up fast or died faster. Gangs ran the streets, each more violent than the last. But the one everyone feared was the Thorn Cartel, a ruthless syndicate that didn't deal in drugs or weapons, but people. One rainy night they came for her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No one called it kidnapping. The workers looked away. Aria, barely 8, was taken from her mother's side in the alley, bundled into a van like scrap cloth, and no one followed. The first time they put her on hooks, it wasn't to hurt her, it was to break her. She was locked in an underground training pit, called the Spindle. Dozens of children, all around her age, were sorted like livestock. The Thorn Cartel didn't just traffic children, they trained assassins out of orphans. They called them thorns because once you were pricked, you bled forever. Those who resisted were punished, and those who survived became weapons. Aria learned quickly, too quickly. Back in the warehouse, years later, the guards didn't realize who she was. They thought she was a spy, a rebel courier caught sneaking into the compound. They didn't know they had captured one of their own ghosts. They didn't know Aria Vale was a former Thorn who had vanished without a trace 5 years ago, long presumed dead after escaping the Spindle. She wasn't dead. She had been gathering names. Aria learned well. It was easy to get caught, because she let them. She knew this warehouse. She remembered the sound of its rusted pulleys, the scent of grease and fear. She had been here once as a child, dragged in for punishment, but now she was back. Not as a Thorn, not as a prisoner, but as a reckoning. One of the guards stepped forward, gripping her jaw. "You think silence scares us?" She slowly turned to him. No hate in her eyes, just recognition. He froze. His fingers trembled. His face went pale. It was subtle, but he remembered her. The girl who was locked in the punishment cell beneath the stairs. The one who bit off a handler's ear before she vanished. The one who was never supposed to survive. And now she was back. And she had let herself be hung on those same hooks. This wasn't surrender. This was a message. And the moment they realized who she was, it was already too late. Outside, under the cover of fog, a signal blinked in the treetops. 3 short flashes. Then the shadows moved. Alia smiled. Not because she was free, but because she was exactly where she needed to be. And this time she wasn't alone. Before Aria Vale became a storm, she was just a shadow, one of many in the blackened underground tunnels of the Spindle. They called it a training facility, but it was nothing more than a factory of silence, where children's names were stripped away and replaced with numbers, and emotion was beaten out of them with electric rods and starvation. Aria's number was 17. She remembered the day they gave it to her. She was lined up with dozens of others in a narrow hallway, barefoot and blindfolded, the floor damp with what she later learned was a mix of rainwater and blood. One by one the recruits were branded, not with fire but with ink needles, fast and efficient, just a number on the inner wrist, nothing personal, nothing human. It was the cartel's way of rewriting children. At first Aria resisted. She didn't speak, didn't train, refused to eat. She was thrown into the quiet room, a soundproof, pitch-black cell no bigger than a closet. They left her there for 3 days. When she came out, her eyes didn't weep, but they watched, and they learned. There was one other child in her batch who didn't fold either. Leor, number 11. He was wiry, fast, and completely unpredictable. He'd been there longer, and something about him survived too well. He told her how the cartel worked, how they took kids and turned them into ghosts, operatives who could assassinate politicians, steal tech from labs, and disappear into war zones unnoticed. They weren't soldiers, they were shadows, trained to disappear behind whoever held their leash. But Leor was different. He didn't just want to survive, he wanted out. For months, Aria trained beside him. Combat, endurance, poison testing, knife work, disguise. It was brutal. 2 kids died during infiltration training alone, frozen on a mock rooftop in the rain. Aria barely flinched.
Every day she became harder, colder, but inside, she was cataloging everything. Routes, patterns, faces, not to serve, but to escape. And one day the chance came. They were sent on a test run, Aria and Lior, a retrieval mission in the upper quarters of the city, disguised as street vendors. What the handlers didn't expect was fire, literally. As they entered the alley, Lior pulled a tiny vial from under his tongue, phosphorus. When he dropped it in the trash bin beside the old power box, the entire grid blinked out in a heartbeat. Smoke, screams, confusion. It was chaos, and in that chaos, Aria and Lior vanished. For 2 days they ran, through sewer canals, abandoned tunnels, scrapyards, no food, no light, just the rhythm of footsteps behind them. The cartel didn't take betrayal lightly. Then, just before dawn on the 3rd day, they were found, not by the cartel, but by a ghost. She called herself Mother Isla, but she was no mother in the usual sense. Her left eye was glass, her back bent from an old explosion, and her hands were always stained with grease and ink. She lived alone in the ruins of an old lighthouse outside the city, a place everyone said was haunted. It was, by her. Isla had once been one of the cartel's earliest creations, a thorn who refused to kill. She faked her death and vanished decades ago. Now she helped the ones who escaped, but not all of them survived. Lior didn't make it. Infection from a knife wound. He died quietly, fingers clutching the edge of the rusted cot, whispering Aria's number 1 last time. 17. Isla burned his body, and Aria broke, but not like before, not into pieces, into steel. She was trained to remember, to think, to rebuild her body, and more importantly, her mind. Pain wasn't erased, it was used, like a wire pulled tight to hold something steady. She learned code, navigation, field medicine. She learned to see 3 moves ahead, and she learned to ask questions. Questions like, who funds the cartel? Who turns a blind eye? Why are some children deemed useful, and others disposable? She no longer called herself 17. She no longer called herself a ghost. She called herself Aria Vale, a name she carved into her own boot leather as a promise. She would go back, not to be punished, not to rescue, but to shatter everything. By the time she re-entered the cartel's radar, she had already dismantled 3 of their safe houses and leaked their trafficking routes to global watchdogs. But no one knew it was her. She wasn't leaving fingerprints, only fire. And now, back in that warehouse on those same hooks, they thought they had caught just another spy. They didn't realize they had opened the door to the past, and the past had teeth. It was strange what pain could teach you, what it revealed when everything else was stripped away. Aria had spent years learning to ignore it, to breathe through the agony, to see beyond the moment. Pain wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a signal. And right now in the warehouse where her wrists bled against old hooks, that signal was saying, they still underestimate you. Good. Right.
One of the guards stepped closer again. He'd been silent since the moment he saw her scars matching the pattern of the hooks. It wasn't possible, he had said under his breath. The only girl who survived that punishment was long gone, vanished, presumed dead, and yet here she was. He whispered something to the man beside him. They argued. Then someone left the room in a rush. Aria kept her head low, eyes half closed. She could feel the timing shift. They were scared now, not of what she could do, but of what she knew. 4 weeks earlier, Aria had stood on a rooftop in the outer district of Valmir, staring through binoculars at the warehouse she was now inside. She had mapped everything: entrances, patrol changes, supply drops, even the coffee habits of the night guard. She wasn't just planning to break in. She was planning to be captured, because inside this warehouse wasn't just another link in the Thorn cartel's chain. It was the nerve center, a distribution point for more than contraband and children. Here they stored names, codebooks, files, encrypted drives, and more importantly, faces. Isla had always told her, you want to kill the root, don't go after the fruit, go after the soil that feeds it. This warehouse wasn't run by some faceless crime boss. It was managed by people in power, officials, businessmen, even one politician who publicly denounced child trafficking while feeding it from the shadows. Aria wasn't here to rescue someone. She was here to expose everyone. And to do that, she had to get inside the secure archive chamber, the one they only opened when a new shipment arrived, or when they caught a threat. So she made herself the threat. The plan had 3 parts. Part 1, be seen. She let herself be spotted outside the perimeter, not sneaking, not running, just standing. She knew the cameras were there, knew the guards would think they were clever to catch her. Part 2, stay silent. She spoke no name, no plea, no hint of her identity. Silence disturbed them more than resistance. They searched her, scanned her, found nothing but a broken locket around her neck. That was by design. Inside the locket wasn't a photo. It was a micro USB, encrypted. Part 3, wait for the fear. The moment the guard saw her scars, everything changed. That reaction was what she counted on. It would send someone running to their supervisor. That supervisor would order the records pulled, just in case. That's when the archive room would open. And when it did, someone on the outside would be ready. The signal had already been sent. 3 short flashes from a rusted skylight.
One of Isla's contacts, a young tech genius named Caro, was waiting with a drone relay system outside the compound. As soon as the archive was accessed, Aria's locket would activate. What no one realized was that she had cut her own palm the night before she entered. The locket had absorbed her blood, and her blood was the key. Bio-encrypted, thanks to Isla's old black market connections. The moment the files were opened and scanned within 20 feet of her, they would silently transmit through the locket to the relay point. She just needed to stay alive for 10 more minutes. Back in the warehouse, a man in a dark suit entered the room. Different from the guards. Clean, expensive shoes. The kind of man who didn't belong in a place like this. He studied her like a professor inspecting a specimen. "Aria Vale," he said quietly. "You were supposed to be dead." She said nothing. He looked at the hooks. "We didn't mean to put you on those. Not again. But maybe it's poetic." He circled her slowly. "You know what happens next, don't you?" Still silence. "Your file will be reopened, reviewed, just in case you're who I think you are." Exactly what she wanted. He turned and gave the order. "Pull her file. Level 1 clearance. Move her to the cold cell until confirmation comes through." The guards hesitated. Then the steel door slammed behind them. Alone again, Aria exhaled. They had taken the bait, and now every name in that archive was leaving with her. But it wouldn't be easy. She knew that. There was still one problem. The man in the suit, she remembered him now. Not from her escape, not from the training pits, from before. He was the one who'd bought her. It was always the scent, not the pain, not the fear. The scent of bergamot and bleach. That's what brought it back. The memory Aria had spent years burying under layers of steel and silence. She hadn't recognized him at first. But now, with the door sealed, the hooks cutting deeper into her wrists, and his aftershave still lingering in the air, the fragments reassembled. He had worn gloves. He never looked at her directly. But his voice, and that scent, it was him, the man who bought her for 15,000 euros. Back then she hadn't understood what was happening. She was barely 9. It was the 3rd week at the spindle, and 2 girls had already disappeared. The handlers said they were too soft for training. Aria assumed that meant they'd been released. Or worse, she didn't know until that night, when she was brought to a glass-walled room on the upper floor. There were 3 other children, all scrubbed, dressed in plain gray clothes. The handlers stood silently by as a group of buyers walked through the observation deck, pointing, whispering, comparing notes like they were inspecting livestock. Aria's stomach had twisted in a way she couldn't explain. Not fear, violation. That was when she first saw the man with the gloves. He hadn't spoken to her, but his eyes had hovered longer than the others. His file was thicker, his security clearance higher, and that night she'd been called from her cell, but she never went, because Lior intervened. He caused a security breach, triggered the internal alarm system by short-circuiting a training console. In the chaos, Aria escaped the room she was meant to enter, but the man still signed off on her. He purchased her anyway. Now in this warehouse he was back, older, cleaner, wearing a suit instead of a coat, but the gloves were the same. Her body reacted before her mind did, heart rate rising, muscles coiling, not in fear, in calculation. She counted the cameras, 3, only one pointed at the corner of the room. She knew what had to come next, but not yet. First she needed him to speak. When he returned, the look in his eyes had changed, less cold, more cautious. He knew something was wrong. "You've made quite a mess," he said, folding his gloved hands in front of him. "Your old trainer, Isla, she would be proud." Silence. He took a seat on a steel stool across from her, calm, unhurried. "I'll admit," he said, "we didn't expect you to be this resourceful." Still, nothing. Then came the smile. Thin, rehearsed. "The files are being pulled as we speak, and once we confirm who you are, we'll kill me," she said suddenly, voice like a knife. He blinked. It was the first word she'd spoken since her capture. She looked directly at him. "You remember the auction?" His lips thinned, but his expression didn't change. "You bought me," she said. "I know you did." He leaned forward slightly. "You think you understand how this works, but you don't. What you remember, what you think happened, it's just trauma playing tricks." Aria laughed, softly, hollow. "You bought me, and then you lost me. That must have stung." The gloves tightened at his knuckles. "There are rules, Aria," he said. "Even in this business, you weren't supposed to survive. You weren't even supposed to make it to the auction floor. You were." He caught himself. "Disposable," she finished for him. There it was. Confirmation. "You don't even remember their names, do you?" she asked. "The others. The ones who didn't make it, who weren't lucky enough to be useful." He rose slowly from the stool. "I don't need to remember names. Only numbers. Yours was 17. He paused. "And you'll always be 17. She was Aria Vale, and her locket had already delivered the full contents of the archive to Caro's offsite relay. Every name, every bank transfer, every face on the buyer list, including his, light upside the compound. Across 3 continents, inboxes were beginning to light up, encrypted files landing on the desks of journalists, prosecutors, whistleblowers, and child protection NGOs. The Thorn Cartel's secrets were now public domain. It was already over. He just didn't know it yet. "You came here thinking pain was your weapon," the man said, turning to leave. "But pain is predictable. It makes people desperate, sloppy." He opened the door. She smiled again. "Not mine." The lights flickered. He turned back, confused. Then boom, The room shook. The fire alarm howled. Aria swung her legs forward and pulled hard against the hook chains. Her shoulder cracked, but she didn't scream, just grit her teeth, because pain wasn't her weakness. It was her signal.
The explosion was controlled but just loud enough. The fire alarms triggered instantly, echoing through the warehouse like a choir of panic. Red lights spun across concrete walls, and heavy boots scrambled down the corridors. Perfect. Aria's left shoulder was dislocated from the yank she'd made on the chains. The pain screamed, but so did freedom. She twisted her wrist, popped the bone again, and slipped her left hand through the slack of the manacle. One down. She braced her foot against the steel beam above her, exhaled, and yanked the other wrist. Skin tore. Muscle stretched, but the hook came loose with a screech. Blood dripped freely now. Her hands were raw. Her body pulsed with heat, but she was down. She was free. And outside, chaos was building. In the control room upstairs, guards barked into radios, trying to confirm the source of the blast. South wall's down. Cameras in Zone 3 are offline. We've been breached, get the asset secured. But it was too late. The system had already been hacked. Caro, Aria's silent tech ally, had infiltrated their grid using the drone relays outside. With just 90 seconds of access, he rerouted their internal comms to loop static, blacked out camera feeds, and opened every emergency gate between the holding cells and the transport docks. That explosion, just a distraction. The real breach was digital. Aria tore a strip of her shirt and wrapped it around her left hand, creating a quick wrap for the bleeding. Her shoulder ached with every step, but adrenaline dulled it. She moved fast, purposeful. This wasn't an escape, it was a mission phase. She turned down a metal staircase into the old wing, Section B, where she remembered the cold cells were kept. Not because she needed to go there, but because they expected her to run the other way. She wasn't running, she was setting a trap. Just past the water leak beneath the stairwell, she found a rusted circuit box. Aria had mapped it during her scouting weeks ago. It fed into the external gate controls, the last backup system the cartel used when power failed. She pried the cover open and yanked 2 wires from her boot cuff. 10 seconds later, the entire back gate began to slide open. Beyond it, the outer yard. Beyond that, the forest, and in the forest. Reinforcements. 2 guards spotted her. Stop, one fired. The bullet clipped her upper arm, hot, slicing. She spun around, ducked low, grabbed a chunk of broken pipe from the floor, and threw it like a spear. It slammed into the man's knee. He screamed, dropping his weapon. She was on the second before he could raise his rifle. Crack, her elbow to his throat. Snap, a knee to the temple, both dropped. No hesitation, no mercy. Aria didn't kill to survive, she killed to end. She bolted through the door at the end of the corridor and found herself in the archive wing. The door had been left open in the confusion. Inside, hard drives lined the walls, backups of the very files she had already sent to Caro. But there was one thing left, the buyer room. Beyond another glass wall sat a vault, inside it, original documents. Old photos, binders full of handwritten lists and ink-stamped approvals. Paper evidence. The kind that couldn't be erased with a keystroke. She didn't have time to take it all. But she didn't have to. She pulled the fuel can from the emergency bin by the wall, uncapped it, splashed it across the floor, and struck the flare she'd stolen from the guard's vest. Whoosh! Flames exploded across the vault, paper curled, names ignited, secrets turned to ash. Not erased, exposed, sent, captured, shared, but now, unusable. Behind her, footsteps. She turned. It was him again, the man in gloves. Only this time he wasn't calm. Smoke curled behind him, his perfect suit was singed. The alarm screamed over his voice, but Aria could hear every word. You think this changes anything? She didn't move, her eyes locked on him like a hawk to a wounded animal. I exposed your entire network, she said. The files are already gone, the media's got them. Law enforcement, governments. He shook his head, slowly. They won't touch us. You think justice matters when the rot goes that deep? Aria tilted her head. No, she whispered. Which is why I didn't come for justice. She stepped forward. One step, another. I came for fear. He reached into his jacket. She was faster. She lunged, slammed his arm into the steel frame, twisted it until she heard the pop of a shoulder. He dropped the pistol. She caught it mid-fall, aimed, stared at him, but didn't fire. Instead, she leaned in. You bought me once, she said, and thought I was yours. She pressed the barrel to his knee. Now I'm giving you back, piece by piece. Crack, one shot. He screamed, falling sideways onto the floor, grabbing his leg. She didn't wait for more. Aria sprinted through the rear gates, blood still soaking her shirt, smoke curling behind her. In the tree line, two black figures waved her forward, Caro and Sella, another ex-Thorn who had gone underground years ago. They'd formed something new now. Not a rescue unit. Not rebels, something quieter, a resistance of ghosts. Aria didn't look back at the fire. She didn't need to. The Thorn cartel hadn't just been burned. It had been seen, and seeing, sometimes, was all it took to start a war. The cabin was buried deep in the Black Pine Range, nearly invisible from the sky. No roads led there, no signals leaked out, only the ghosts knew how to find it. Aria sat at the edge of the small clearing, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her arm was stitched, her shoulder braced, and her ribs tightly bound beneath layers of gauze. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, but not blood. For once it was silent, but Aria knew peace was a lie. This wasn't the end, it was the start. Caro stepped out of the shadows, holding a solar-powered tablet. His eyes were tired, bloodshot. But burning. They're trying to spin the story, he said. Calling it a rogue raid, denying the files. But, he turned the screen around. Aria stared. It was a live stream. A woman from the Eastern Bureau of Global Crime speaking to the press. A public address. We have verified the authenticity of the documents, the woman said, voice steady. The Thorn cartel is real. The global trafficking ring it maintained was protected by layers of political and corporate corruption. The screen cut to images Aria knew too well. Cages. Children. Documents stamped with military and diplomatic seals. And then, her photo. Not the mugshot they had used before. Not the grainy footage from her abduction. But a still image from a drone camera, her limping across the forest line, bloody and alive. She's out there, the woman continued. And she's the reason we're standing here today. Aria turned away. She didn't want to be the face of anything. She had names in her mind. Sisters. Not symbols. Mila. Taken from a border checkpoint. Adira, sold by a cousin to pay off a debt. Lena, too young to remember her real name. They were the reason Aria had turned back. The reason she'd infiltrated the car instead of disappearing. She hadn't just escaped. She'd walked back into the fire with gasoline in her veins. But those girls. They never got out, and most wouldn't even be remembered. Unless Aria made sure they were. Sella entered the cabin. She was older than Aria by a decade, with a face carved by loss and survival. Her body bore scars, burns, old blade marks, but her eyes were bright. They've frozen 4 accounts already, she said. Bleeding the Thorns' finances, raids are hitting Lisbon, Johannesburg, Tel Aviv. We've got cells waking up. Cells? Aria asked, eyebrows rising. Sella nodded. All those who escaped. People like us, hiding, waiting. You gave them a signal. We need more than signals. Aria muttered. We need strikes. We need stories. Truth they can't bury. Caro leaned forward. You thinking what I think you are. Aria stood, pain tightening her jaw. She walked to the map pinned on the far wall. Dozens of red strings connected cities, ports, airfields, private prisons. She pointed to the eastern edge. The Aral outpost. The beginning. That's where they made me disappear, she said. That's where the next fire starts. That night, as the others slept, Aria stepped outside. The moon was low and copper-colored, stained by the haze of distant flames. She thought about her first night in captivity. The hooks, the silence, the fear. They had tried to break her by treating her like a thing, a body, but what they didn't understand
was that she had been broken long before they ever touched her. And that's what saved her. Because when you've already been burned down to nothing, you stop being afraid of fire. Her voice was low when she spoke, just a whisper to the trees. This isn't revenge. Applause. This is reclamation. Behind her, the cabin lights dimmed. Power saving mode. In the shadows, Kara watched her quietly. He knew better than to interrupt. Aria was more than a symbol now. She was a reckoning. In 5 days they'd move. In 5 weeks half the network would be ashes. And in 5 months, she would be a name they whispered in fear. 5 days later, the frozen winds of the Aralt steppe howled across a stretch of abandoned military terrain. Underneath the frost, buried within satellite dead zones, stood a structure that didn't officially exist. Outpost 9, known only to those who survived it. It was where Aria Vale was once disappeared. And now it was where she had returned. The operation had been timed down to the minute. The ghosts and name the world had given the scattered survivors of the Thorn cartel were no longer hiding. Sela coordinated the strike team from a snow-covered ridge, using scrambled frequencies. Caro, now fully embedded in the underground resistance networks, had pulled old schematics from a Cold War-era database that mapped the tunnels beneath the outpost. Aria crouched beneath the rusted hull of an overturned transport vehicle. Her breath came out in thin wisps as she checked her harness, her blades, and the signal transponder strapped to her arm. No more running, no more hiding. This time, they were the ones knocking. 2 minutes to breach, whispered Sela over comms. Aria's fingers curled tightly around the cold grip of her stun launcher. She'd fought in jungle heat, city ruins, underground cages, but the snow made it personal. It reminded her of that long frozen night, when they'd first dragged her here, bleeding and blindfolded, through the back gates. But now the gates were coming down. A low rumble vibrated through the snow, as the ghosts triggered a controlled charge beneath the west wall. The explosion was muffled by snowdrift, but effective. Surveillance went offline, lights inside flickered. Panic spread before the guards had a chance to organize. Aria was already inside by the time the second charge blew. The halls were exactly as she remembered, narrow, concrete, stained with time and screams. Every step echoed with ghosts. But she wasn't looking for memory. She was looking for evidence. Down in the processing vault she found it. Row after row of steel cabinets, unmarked. Digital files hidden behind triple-layered encryption. Caro and the tech team began siphoning data as fast as possible. But it wasn't what they found that made Aria stop cold. It was what wasn't supposed to be there. One of the cabinets was newer, no frost, recently opened. Inside was a stack of medical binders and hard drives marked with a single insignia, a red serpent encircling a winged syringe. Medical Division RA, and DISH-exempt protocols. Aria opened the first file, and felt her stomach turn. Photos of children, diagrams of injections, neurochemical manipulation schedules. These weren't just trafficked victims, they were test subjects. This wasn't just about slavery, this was about experimentation. I need extraction in 5. Caro's voice crackled over the comms, but Aria wasn't listening. Her hand hovered over a metal drawer labeled Subject 36A, her number. She pulled it open. Inside a small photo, her age 10, eyes wide with terror, and beneath it, a page with a clinical summary of her psychological responses under duress. Notes on her anomalous resilience. A scribbled line read, possible non-induced trauma conditioning, likely pre-capture. Recommend observation, not termination. They had kept her alive not out of mercy, but because she was an experiment. Outside, gunfire erupted. A backup team from an unknown faction had arrived, armed, fast and not wearing Thorn insignia. Mercenaries. Aria stuffed the drives into her coat and sprinted toward the south tunnel exit. The air was thick with smoke. Debris rained down from the ceilings as she slid through collapsing corridors. Sela's voice shouted, "We've got you. 30 meters east, thermals picking you up." Aria burst through the access hatch, just as the entire west wing caved in. She stumbled into the snow, bleeding from a cut on her temple, clutching the files. She didn't look back. Not this time. Back at the safe zone, Caro and Sella examined the data. And then everything changed. They weren't just training children, Caro said, eyes wide. They were designing them. The Thorn cartel wasn't just trafficking. It was bioengineering trauma-resilient operatives, using unregulated chemical conditioning. They weren't raising killers, Sella whispered. They were growing them. Aria sat quietly in the corner, the folder still open on her lap. So that's what she was to them, a prototype. Her entire life, from the first hook to the last scream, had been someone's experiment, someone's file, a line of data, until now. Now, she was the control that broke the pattern. Somewhere across the globe, the red serpent emblem still lived. And now she had a name for the next hunt, Project Basilisk. The safe house was deep beneath a decommissioned observatory in the Albanian mountains, cold, quiet, and unreachable. There, surrounded by flickering monitors, exposed wiring, and faded constellations on the cracked dome above, the ghosts laid out everything they had uncovered. Aria sat in silence, watching the screens as the red serpent emblem slowly resolved into a corporate logo. Basilisk Initiative Vertical Bar, Classified Tier Sigma. A black-funded biotech shell company, with no employees, no patents, no taxes, just a name. And files that painted a horror story, with surgical precision. These weren't just traffickers, Caro muttered, pulling up internal documentation. They were data harvesters. Every scar, every psychological reaction, every behavioral test, it all got logged into Basilisk's system. Sella crossed her arms, frowning. The children weren't just broken for control, they were being tested like products. A chart scrolled past the screen, categories labeled pain threshold, compliance curve, emotional collapse, rebound potential. Aria's number was there, 36A. Beneath it in bold red, stable outlier, candidate for re-entry. They were planning to bring me back, Aria whispered. Voice cold. Caro nodded grimly. You weren't the end of the project, you were the beginning. From what they could piece together, Project Basilisk had existed for nearly 15 years, funded by a coalition of black market financiers, rogue paramilitary units, and corporate defense labs. Its goal? Not to build assassins, but to create unbreakable operatives, human beings who had endured such orchestrated trauma that they could not be compromised, interrogated, or emotionally manipulated. They called it resilience-based conditioning, and Thorn was just their test site. That changed everything. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was about stopping a machine that had outlived its creators, and was now being picked up by nations. We found a lead, Sella said, tapping the screen. A former Basilisk handler turned whistleblower. Disappeared 2 years ago in Iceland. Last message, sent from an abandoned psychiatric facility in Reykjavik. Aria stood up. I'll go alone. Sella raised an eyebrow. You don't have to. I do, Aria said. This isn't just another step. It's the why. I need to know why I was built, why I survived, why they hung me, and why they stopped. 2 weeks later, Aria stepped off a shadow-chartered boat and into the frozen silence of Iceland's wind. The wind clawed through her coat, but she moved steadily, eyes fixed on the looming outline of the Njord Asylum. It had once been a state-run mental institution. Now, it was abandoned, or so they claimed. Inside, the place smelled of rust, mildew, and secrets. She moved quietly through the halls. No lights, no cameras, but someone had been here. Papers were scattered, a cot was still warm, and near the back of the building, a strange altar of sorts had been assembled. Newspaper clippings, children's shoes, a small notebook with basilisk symbols drawn in manic patterns. And there, crouched behind a wall of filing cabinets, was a man with sunken eyes and shaking hands. Don't shoot, he said. I know your number. Aria lowered her weapon slowly. Who are you? My name is Aaron Madsen, he whispered. I designed the basilisk trials. She didn't move. Why? Aaron laughed bitterly. Because they told us we were saving lives. They said if we can control trauma, we can prevent it. They lied. Aria stepped closer. Tell me everything. He nodded. Project Basilisk was never about creating soldiers. It was about creating survivors who don't break. The kind the world could use when machines failed, when laws failed, when morality became inconvenient. His eyes met hers. You were the one subject we couldn't replicate. You didn't fracture like the others. You didn't forget who you were. Why? She asked. Because, he said softly. You weren't conditioned by us. You came in already broken, but still whole. We didn't build you. You built yourself. Silence. In that moment, something in Aria's chest shifted. Her past didn't own her. She wasn't a ghost of Project Basilisk. She was its error, its flaw, its reckoning. She turned to leave, but Iran called after her. They'll come for me, he said. For telling you this. Aria paused at the doorway. Then she tossed him a transponder. Hide until the light turns blue. That's your window. After that you're on your own. And she was gone. Back at the safe house, she relayed what she'd learned. And they agreed on one thing. Project Basilisk wasn't dormant. It was growing. That night, Aria stood at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the valley. Wind tore through her hair. The stars were clearer here, cold and distant. She pulled the photo of her 10-year-old self from her coat pocket. The one from the file drawer. I see you now, she whispered. You weren't weak. You were learning how to survive. She let the wind take the photo. The girl in the picture had been a lab rat. The woman she had become was something else entirely. A storm was coming. And this time, Aria was the one setting the trap. They called it Operation Icofall. No longer whispers in the shadows. The ghosts made their first coordinated strike, across 5 countries, in a single night, seizing hard drives, intercepting shipments, and exposing hidden compounds, tied to Project Basilisk. They didn't just hack servers, they hacked the story. By morning nearly every major news outlet in Europe and Asia had received anonymous files, uncensored footage of broken children, experiments, numbered files, and damning financial records connecting Basilisk to real, current officials. The media had no choice. They ran with it, and the world woke up screaming. But with the exposure came consequences. Aria, once invisible, now had a price on her head. 5 million euros, dead or alive. Every ghost operative's name was red-flagged. Half their funding vanished overnight. But they were prepared. Because this wasn't about safety. This was about truth in the open, and daring the world to look away. Still, Aria knew something wasn't right. Too easy, too clean. And then came the message. A voice recording broadcast across their hidden channels. Metallic, spliced, distorted, but clear. We always knew you'd resurface. That's why we never stopped. Every Hydra grows back stronger. And this time, we're not training survivors. We're training kings. The ghosts went silent. Aria clenched her jaw. They've evolved. Caro slammed his fist into the table. We handed them exposure, and they just shifted their skin. Sela shook her head. They wanted us to go public. It was bait. Aria stared at the screen, where a new logo flickered. No longer Basilisk. Now the Sovereign Program. New name. Same horror. But this time, it wasn't hidden in basements. It was wrapped in gold. Their focus had shifted to elite adoption programs, private education for rescued youth, and training academies for high-performance children. The abuse was no longer criminal. It was sanitized, backed by billionaires and politicians, with smiling faces and spotless records. The kids didn't wear numbers anymore. They wore medals. But Aria recognized the signs, the glassy eyes, the stillness in photos, the controlled environments. Sovereign was Basilisk 2.0, and it was more dangerous than ever. They had one shot, reach the final piece of the puzzle, an insider still buried in the system. Someone deep enough to know the Sovereign program's operational centers. Her name Nova Calix. Officially she was the Chief Youth Welfare Coordinator for Sovereign's European branch. Unofficially, she was one of the last Basilisk survivors to ever escape intact, then mysteriously reabsorbed into the system years later. Why would she go back? Caro asked. Aria answered coldly. To finish what I didn't. Their mission was clear. infiltrate the Sovereign Summit in Zurich, where Nova would be speaking. It was guarded like a war zone. Retina, scans, biometric tags, ex-military personnel in tuxedos. But the ghosts weren't coming through the front door. They were already inside. At 9 p.m., as the summit's gala swirled with applause and clinking wine glasses, the screens behind the speakers glitched. And then, a face appeared. Aria's, not current young, 10 years old, hooked, broken, staring straight into the lens. The room went dead silent, until the images began to roll, live, unfiltered, unstoppable. Every sovereign donor, every file, every experiment, every fake adoption, displayed in real time to the guests, and streaming across the global news network. And then came the final image. Nova Calix, not as she appeared now, but as a basilisk child herself. Gasps. Cameras turned, and there she stood, in the middle of the crowd, older now, beautiful, poised, but her hands trembled. Aria stepped out from the shadows, their eyes locked. You knew, Aria said. You knew what they were, and you helped rebuild it. Nova's voice cracked. I thought if I stayed inside, I could slow it down, change it. But they're everywhere, Aria. You burn one root, 10 more grow. Aria walked toward her, the room now ringed with silent, stunned guests. And you let them use our pain to sell a future. Nova looked down, then finally, then help me stop it. No gunshots, no screaming, just the quiet, explosive sound of an empire collapsing in the age of visibility. The ghosts vanished that night, but their work did not. The files remained online, replicated by thousands, shared across continents. No one could erase them now, and Sovereign began to fall. Aria didn't wait for credit. The world could argue over villains and heroes. She had a different mission now, one only she could finish.
The door was still there, rusting, stained. The fingerprint scanner long broken, replaced now with a chipped keypad. But the numbers hadn't changed. Aria knew them like a prayer carved into her bones. 0310. The day she died and was remade. The keypad blinked green. The door groaned open, and Aria stepped back into the room where she had been hung, body bleeding, eyes wide, heart shattered, but never broken. The hook room was smaller now, or maybe she had just grown. The rows of chains still dangled from the ceiling, their metal dull and lifeless. The floor was clean, too clean. The smell of bleach tried to erase what had once saturated every inch of this place. But memories don't wash off. They live in the silence between drips. They live in the breath you hold and never release. She walked to the wall, that wall, where they had written on her, where her weight, age, and reaction times were once recorded like stats on a lab rat. Her number 04DX. She traced it with her fingers. This was the final stronghold, the final site of Sovereign's original basilisk core, hidden underground in what the world thought was an abandoned wellness retreat. The irony would have made her laugh if it hadn't made her sick, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, the ghosts stepped in: Sela, Caro, Armin, and 5 new recruits. They weren't soldiers, they were survivors. One of them, a girl no older than 12, stood frozen at the threshold. Her name was Mira, saved 2 years ago from one of Sovereign's orphan grooming houses. Aria had never brought her into the field, until now. Mira stared at the hooks, then at Aria. Did they hang you too? Aria nodded. But I didn't stay there, and neither will you. They split into units. Sela went toward the archive room, what once stored medical charts, now digitized into an AI network Sovereign believed was unbreachable. Caro led the extraction team, 2 vans waiting above ground with forged medical credentials and diplomatic plates. They had 10 minutes before local guards realized the compound was more than a shell. Time was the enemy. Truth was the weapon. And Aria, she headed deeper. Below the hook chamber, a new corridor had been built, bright, white, sterile, like a clinic. Behind glass rooms, children lay strapped to padded tables, not tortured, no, not this time. Now they were stimulated. Electrodes on their heads, probes on their fingers. Silent TVs flashed images too fast to track, not pain. Programming. She found a terminal.
plugged in Sella's decryption tool. As code flooded the screen, Aria's eyes scanned the files. They weren't just trying to suppress trauma anymore. They were turning trauma into obedience, making perfect little performers, soldiers, manipulators, children who could read a room, say the right thing, shoot when needed, disappear when ordered. It wasn't just abuse anymore. It was design. A noise behind her. Footsteps. She spun around. Nova Calyx. Alone. Unarmed. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. "You always needed to see it again." Aria stammered. "You told me you wanted to stop it, but it never stopped. You just polished it." Nova nodded. "I know." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't kill the system from inside, Aria. But you can burn it from out there, and I can let you in." She handed over her biometric badge. Level 7 access. The core. Aria took it. "No more speeches, Nova. No more games." Nova looked toward the glass chambers. "They don't know they're prisoners yet." Aria's voice was a whisper. "They will." 10 minutes later, the building was empty. The children had been lifted, the files extracted, the servers detonated, and the hooks melted. Before they left, Mira stood beside Aria in the room. She reached up to the lowest chain and tugged it gently. It jangled like an old wind chime. "I used to have dreams about this place, and I'd always wake up before I saw the end." Aria crouched beside her. "This is the end." Mira shook her head. "No. It's the start." They walked out into the dawn. No alarms, no gunfire, just light. Aria didn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, but because it finally did. The world didn't change overnight. The hooks didn't vanish from memory. The screams didn't soften in echo, but something had shifted. Not in a flash, not in a headline, but in quiet corners of power, in sealed courtrooms, in intercepted data leaks that made their way to trusted hands. And behind it all, Aria Vale's fingerprints. They called it the sovereign collapse. Though the media danced around the truth, the whispers were deafening. A global child manipulation network, masked under charity fronts and elite research programs, brought to its knees by an anonymous syndicate. There were arrests, quiet ones, raids, disbanded programs, files decrypted and dropped into the laps of investigative reporters, defense lawyers, and select members of the International Justice Tribunal. No one claimed credit. No one had to. But across every whisper, one name always returned. The ghosts. Sella became the public face, posing as a whistleblower from a fictitious NGO called Bright Future. Her story, while dramatized, opened the gates. Talk shows, UN panels, interviews flooded in. The world wanted a name, but Aria stayed hidden, not because she was afraid, but because she was still watching. Meanwhile, the ghosts multiplied. No longer just survivors, they became mentors. The youngest ones, Mira, Yusuf, Ella, were now training others in tactical intelligence and emotional resilience. Not in violence. Not anymore. The Ghost Network evolved into what Aria once believed impossible, a safe place. A haven for those whose trauma had made them feel like weapons. Now, they were builders, but the victory wasn't without scars. Koro was killed during the operation in Prague, shielding a group of trafficked siblings when a sovereign loyalist triggered a detonation. His name was etched into the wall of the Ghost Sanctuary. Armin left months after, unable to bear the weight of it all. Aria didn't blame him. Some ghosts deserve rest. As for Nova Calyx, her testimony shook entire foundations. She confessed in full on record and under oath to her role in Sovereign's re-education division. The data she handed over led to over 117 arrests worldwide. She was sentenced to 45 years in an international prison, no parole, but in her final statement, she said, "I was never the hero, but I saw one, and I followed her." No one questioned who she meant. Years passed, and one day, a new building rose on the edge of the same coastal city where Aria's story began. It looked like a school, but it wasn't. It was called the Forge, and inside were children, not to be shaped into killers, but into something Sovereign never understood. Leaders. Aria never spoke at the Forge, but she visited. She would walk the gardens, sit under the olive tree in the courtyard, watch the children play. Sometimes Mira would join her, now a confident instructor barely 16, but already writing policy documents and international guides on post-trauma reintegration. One day, Mira asked her, "Do you ever miss the fight?" Aria didn't answer at first. Then she smiled. "Only the part where I didn't have to look over my shoulder." Mira smirked. "You still do." "Habit," Aria said, "not fear." One evening, a young boy handed her a drawing. A girl with wings made of broken chains, standing in a room of hooks that had turned into flowers. He said, "This is you." She asked, "How do you know?" He answered, "Mira told us. You were the first who came back." Legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about making sure no one else would ever be forgotten. And for the girl who had once hung in the dark, her name was now written in light. There was one last thing left to do. A thread frayed and forgotten, still pulling quietly at the edge of Aria's soul. Not revenge, not justice, just understanding. The ghosts had uncovered nearly everything about Sovereign's global network. Every facility, every transaction, every compromised ally. Except one. The Origin Vault. The place where it all began. The database that contained the earliest test subjects, their conditioning logs, and most crucially, the project's first designer. Not Nova. Not the directors she had named. Someone older, buried, untouched by exposure. Someone who had signed the papers that labeled Aria, not as human but as Prototype 04DX. The vault wasn't in a lab or bunker. It was in a museum, disguised within an archival preservation center in Vienna, under the pretense of housing forgotten Cold War tech and obscure psychological studies. But behind 3 locked levels of security, a server glowed, and on that server, Patient Zero. Aria walked in alone, no team, no weapons, no ghosts, just a fingerprint, a retina scan, and a whisper of a code Nova had left her before sentencing. The room was colder than she expected. Empty rows of terminals lined the walls like forgotten altars. In the center sat a single station still active. Aria stepped forward and tapped the screen. Project Helix file recall initiated. Subject 04DX. Aria Vale requesting override. She paused, then typed, "I am not your subject." The screen blinked. Files unfolded. Medical reports, training logs, surveillance footage. Her at age 7, speaking into a microphone in a room full of mirrors. No emotion, just reciting phrases. "My purpose is to serve. I am nothing without orders." But beneath those something else. Letters. Correspondence between the founding members of Sovereign. Ethical concerns. Retractions. Replacements. One message marked, "Do not allow the child to remember her name. If she remembers, she becomes unpredictable. If she becomes unpredictable, she becomes unstoppable." They were right, because she had remembered. And now she was here. She copied the entire vault, not to leak, but to archive. For the next generation of ghosts, they would learn from the darkness without drowning in it. That was the difference. Before she left, she printed one page. The first page of her file. Name redacted, age 5, program entry. Voluntary via parental signature, project code 04DX, classification. High empath with enhanced strategic cognition, recommended path. Suppression, loyalty condition and operative training. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Monitor for emotional resistance. If it persists, reassign to disposal." Aria folded the page, not with rage, but peace. She had already outlived every one of their predictions. Back in her quiet sanctuary in Portugal, she pinned that single sheet to her wall. Above it, she scrawled in ink, "I wrote the ending." Years passed. The Forge expanded, opening branches in 5 countries. Former ghosts took roles in policy, education, even global trauma therapy initiatives. The hooks were now metaphors, not chains. Mira graduated from university at 18. Her thesis, "The Neuroscience of Reclaimed Identity," was published globally. It started with a dedication to the woman who taught me that being broken is not the end, just the moment before the wings unfold. And Aria, She faded quietly into the world, not as a myth, but as a gardener, a reader, a mentor to those who whispered late-night fears they couldn't say aloud to anyone else. Some knew her past, most didn't. They only knew the feeling she left behind, safe, seen, free. On her final birthday, a small package arrived at her door. No name, just a seal with the ghost emblem. Inside, a silver chain, once used to hang her in that dark room long ago, melted down, recast. Now a pendant shaped like a phoenix. A note inside read, "You unhooked us all. We fly because you burned the place down first." Now, she stood at the edge of the sea that evening, watching the sun fall over the waves, and for the first time in her life, Aria Vale said something she had never said before, softly, simply, truthfully, "I'm home." The forge had grown. What began as a sanctuary for a few frightened survivors was now a living, breathing world of its own. Gardens, classrooms, training spaces, and a therapy wing designed like a treehouse, all suspended between branches of a massive fig tree. But Aria didn't come today for the buildings or the future they symbolized. She came for the quiet ones, the ones who stayed. Not all ghosts became agents, instructors, or reformers. Some didn't want to fight or speak on world stages. They didn't want to lead initiatives or write reports. They just wanted to be, without being watched, weighed, or weaponized. They had earned that right. Inside a circular glass room at the edge of the sanctuary grounds, 5 ghosts sat around a low table. A tea kettle steamed in the center. The windows were open. The wind was soft. Aria stepped in. Nico looked up first, a boy now 19, who used to count his heartbeats out loud when scared. Next to him was Ray, deaf since birth and Sovereign's attempt to fix her. She now taught nonverbal communication to new arrivals. Zan and Lyra, twins taken from opposite ends of the world, but reunited by Sovereign's sick design, sat close. Neither spoke often, but when they did, their voices finished each other's thoughts like poetry. And then there was Eden, the youngest when rescued, the oldest now among the ones who stayed. She rose and hugged Aria wordlessly, holding on a beat longer than usual. "You look tired," Eden finally said, pouring her tea. "I feel tired," Aria admitted, taking the cup. Ray handed her a piece of paper, written in bold block letters. "We heard about Black Site X. Is it real?" Aria nodded. "It's worse than the others. Not physical conditioning, emotional erasure, memory deletion. They were trying to create empathy vacuums." Zan tilted their head. "To make leaders without hearts. Lyra, or monsters without questions." Aria didn't respond, because they weren't wrong. The ghosts were the proof of that failure, of resistance. But Sovereign had nearly succeeded. Nearly. Eden reached under the table, and pulled out a small clay box. "We've been collecting," she said. She opened the lid. Inside were dozens of tiny tokens, hair ties, paper cranes, pieces of thread, carved initials in wood, a photograph of someone's hand in another's. "They're from kids we've helped," she explained. "Each left something behind when they moved on. These are the ones who never returned." Aria looked at them and felt her throat close. Not from grief, from pride. "They didn't come back because they didn't have to," she said softly. "No," Nico corrected. "They couldn't. Most don't even remember this place, and that's good. But some of us do, and we stay, to remember for them." That was it. That was the thread she had missed in all her planning, all her missions, all her victories and losses. She had built for the world. She had burned down systems. But memory was fragile, and someone had to guard it, not as evidence, but as a living story. Eden leaned in. "We want to be the archive." "The what?" "The emotional archive," she clarified. "The story keepers. Not documents or files, just feelings. Memories passed hand to hand. The warmth, the pain, the weird jokes and dark laughs we made up in basements. The lullabies whispered by survivors to each other. Things that don't get written." Ray signed something. Eden translated, "Because if we don't, the world will turn us into statistics." Aria reached across the table. "I wish I'd had you when I was 14, she said. "You did," Eden whispered. "You just didn't know it." For the rest of the day, they walked the memory garden together, planted by Ray, lined with herbs from every region Sovereign once touched. They didn't talk about Sovereign, or politics, or battles. They talked about a boy who used to sing lullabies to himself at night, because he didn't remember his mother's voice. About a girl who named every bruise like a constellation so it would hurt less. About the time Mira tried to bake, and nearly set the forge's kitchen on fire, because she thought cayenne pepper and cinnamon were interchangeable. They laughed. And at sunset, Eden gave Aria a pouch of seed paper shaped like feathers. When you find a place that feels safe, she said, plant one, not to remember pain, but to grow something from it. Aria stood at the gate before she left, holding the pouch. What if I never find that place? She asked. Nico grinned. Then keep walking, and leave feathers in the places you wish someone had done the same for you. That night, far from the forge, Aria walked along a coastline where she once saw a child nearly drown herself because she thought it would end her pain. She knelt in the soil, planted a single feather, and whispered, "This is for the ones who stayed."
It arrived on an encrypted drive. No message, no sender. Just a blinking red light, and one file name, black_site_psych, confidential. Mira was the one who found it, embedded in a UN data leak, sent to a secure server monitored by ghost operatives. She ran 3 antivirus checks before opening it. What she found was worse than anything they'd seen since the collapse. Not because it was brutal, but because it was clean. Aria read through the documents in silence, blueprints, biometric scans, psych logs, all referencing a site supposedly dismantled 20 years ago. But the last update, dated 6 months prior, Black Site X, buried beneath a hydroelectric facility on the Belarus-Russia border. Disguised as a water regulation lab, no digital entry logs, no surveillance. No official record of entry, except one line of code embedded in a document footer, Helix DX override, prototype 00. Confirmed active, prototype 00. The one before her, the one Sovereign never admitted existed. We shouldn't go alone, Mira said, sitting beside her on the rooftop of the forge. We won't, Aria replied. I'm calling Ren. Ren had once been known as Cypher Ghost, a hacker so good at disappearing, the CIA once accused him of being a myth. Now he grew herbs in a rooftop greenhouse and wrote trauma therapy software. When Aria called, he didn't hesitate. Send coordinates, he said. I'll meet you at the breach point. The journey to the border was uneventful, no tails, no drones, just forest snow and silence. They met Ren in a crumbling warehouse 5 kilometers from the site. Look familiar, he asked, showing them the schematic. Aria nodded. Too familiar. Mira was quiet. Her fingers twitched nervously over her thigh holster. She hadn't carried a weapon in over a year. But she had brought one today. They moved at night. The hydroplant was still functional. Guards rotated every 6 hours, but the lower sector showed almost no activity. Ren breached the subgrid from a maintenance panel. The 3 of them descended a rusted stairwell, lit only by emergency floodlights. At the bottom a steel door awaited, sealed by a handprint scanner. Mira stepped forward. I shouldn't be able to do this, she murmured. She placed her hand on the scanner. It blinked green. Access granted. Aria froze. Why would your print? They recycled us, Mira whispered. Cloned permissions. Used our trauma signatures like keys. Beyond the door a sterile corridor stretched for half a mile, white walls. No cameras, just the hum of machinery. Every 10 feet there was a panel on the wall. Mira tapped one. A holographic interface appeared. It displayed neurochemical maps of a child's brain. Dopamine levels, cortisol thresholds, sleep cycles, artificial dream induction. They weren't testing obedience here, Ren said. They were testing memory deletion. They walked past dozens of sealed doors, each marked with a single digit. Room 03. Room 09. Room 17. All empty. But then they found it. Room 00. No window. No label. Just a reinforced black panel. Aria swiped the master card they'd duplicated from a former Sovereign mole. The door clicked open.
Inside, the air was colder than anything she'd ever breathed. A single chair sat in the center of the room. A young woman, maybe 23, sat with her arms folded neatly on her lap. She had a sensor strip on her temple. Her eyes were open, but distant. Not blank, just waiting. She blinked slowly. "I thought you'd come," she said. Her voice wasn't mechanical. It was gentle, curious, human. Aria stepped forward. "Do you know who you are?" "I was told not to," the girl replied. "But then I started dreaming. In color. That was the first mistake." Mira leaned in. "You're prototype 0. The girl smiled. "No. I'm what's left of her." She stood slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her joints. "Sovereign used me to test their perfect deletion cycle. I was the first success, until you. You were the glitch." Aria blinked. "You remember me?" "No," the girl replied. "But I remember the file, the day they transferred me to the vault, and I saw your image on the monitor. You looked like me. But your eyes fought back." Ren was already scanning the room for hard drives. "We have to lift the black file system and get her out." But the girl prototype 0 shook her head. "I'm wired into the core. If I leave, it triggers a purge. Then we'll disarm it." Mira insisted. "You can't. The kill command is hard-coded to my heartbeat." They thought of everything. A silence fell. Then Aria stepped forward. "There's always a loophole." She reached into her coat and pulled out a backup AI driver, an emotional ghost clone of Sovereign's operating system they had reverse-engineered during the early Forge days. It was designed to mimic a subject's neural signature for test simulation. "Can we spoof her heartbeat with this?" she asked Ren. He paused. "If I splice the driver into the monitor and match her vitals, maybe. But it's unstable. Might trigger early purge." "We won't let that happen," Aria said. 20 minutes later, the file was cloned. The black system disarmed. Prototype 0 stood at the doorway, staring back at the room she'd lived in for 18 years. "This place erased me," she said. Aria nodded. "Then you erase it." 0 reached for the console, pressed a button. The room went dark. Outside, under the starlit sky, Ren sealed the outer hatch with thermite. Mira watched the flames spark. "This wasn't just a prison," she said. "No," Aria replied. "It was a blueprint. And now it's ash." They drove away in silence. And somewhere deep in the Forge archive, the black file was marked recovered. Deactivated. Never again. Part 15. The girl who remembered everything. It started with a letter. Not digital, not encoded, just paper, creased, smudged, delivered by hand to the Forge gate. On the front, in faint blue ink. "For the one who remembers." Inside was a name Aria hadn't heard in years. Luma Soren. And beneath it a line that stopped her cold. "I remember everything. Help me forget." Luma arrived 3 days later. Tall, barely 20. Eyes like cracked glass. Beautiful but full of fracture lines. She didn't flinch at security. Didn't hesitate in the presence of ghosts. She walked through the Forge like she had designed it. Because she almost had. In the early years, Sovereign tested dozens of neural enhancements. Some were built to suppress memory. Luma was the opposite. She was designed to hold everything. Every detail. Every face. Every instruction. Every punishment. She had once recited an entire textbook after hearing it read aloud, backward. Sovereign called it total recall conditioning. But it came with a cost. Her mind was splintering. Mira was the first to welcome her. Aria waited, watching from the shadowed balcony above the courtyard, until Mira finally said, "She knows your voice. She said you used to hum." Aria blinked. "That's not possible." Mira shrugged. "Apparently it is." They met in the memory garden. Luma sat cross-legged by the olive tree, weaving blades of grass into circles. Aria approached slowly, deliberately. "You're the one who remembers?" Aria asked. Luma didn't look up. "I remember you bleeding on a steel floor, and never crying. I was in the room next to yours. I counted your breaths through the wall." Aria sat. "That's a terrible thing to remember." Luma shrugged. "I remember all of it. The training rooms. The hooks. The screams. The whispers. Nova's perfume. Caro's last words. Caro, Aria asked sharply. I read his file after he died, Luma said softly. I remember how he covered the twins during the Prague blast. I remember the blood trajectory, the sound velocity, the sop, Aria whispered. And Luma did. Immediately. Like a switch had flipped. I don't want to, she said after a long pause. But it's all I know. I was trained to be memory. That was my purpose. I even remember Prototype 0. Aria's eyes narrowed. You knew her. No. But I remember the day they erased her. And the message one of the texts sent before he died. He wrote, there was another. Before 0. Buried beneath simulation levels. Aria froze. Another. They called her Genesis. The girl who failed too perfectly. The Forge's archives didn't list anything about Genesis. Not even in the black file. But Luma led them to it anyway. She didn't need access codes or schematics. She just remembered. Buried beneath the oldest section of the vault, past the simulation records and neural pattern indexes, was an offline terminal, long dormant. Luma walked up to it, and tapped a single key sequence. The screen blinked. Project Genesis access level. Obscura status. Redacted. And then the file began to unfold. Images. Logs. Diagrams. Subject 00. A Genesis age. 3 genetic anomalies. Mirror touch synesthesia. Extreme emotional projection. Anomalous pattern recognition. Result. System rejection disposition. Dissolved via simulation burial. She wasn't killed, Luma said quietly. She was put into a permanent false reality. One designed to contain her mind forever. Aria's voice was low. Where? Luma looked up, her eyes burning. In a digital prison sovereign built to test future AIs. A world that repeats endlessly. She's been trapped in a loop for 2 decades. Alive. Technically. If you believe consciousness is survival. Ren joined them a day later. They hooked a terminal to his custom quantum node, and located a residual neural signature. It pulsed faintly, like a dying heartbeat. Can we extract her? Aria asked. Ren frowned. Only if someone goes in. Luma stepped forward. No. You've carried too much, Aria told her. That's why I'm the only one who can do it, Luma replied. If Genesis is still in there, she'll be lost in every version of herself. She'll need someone who remembers the truth. Mira tried to stop her. Aria didn't. Because some battles had to be fought within. The simulation core was primitive by today's standards. A floating mind palace of rotating memories, fractal corridors, synthetic sunlight, and fractured rules of time. Luma entered it like a memory she had rehearsed. She found Genesis in a garden that bloomed and died in seconds. A child's face age-shifting by the minute. Eyes vacant, flickering with every cycle. I've been waiting, Genesis whispered. Luma knelt. I came to help you remember. Genesis shook her head. No. You came so I could forget. Then she leaned forward and whispered a name. One not in the files. One no one should have known. Luma guessed. That was her real name. Genesis smiled faintly. And now it's yours. The program began to destabilize. Ren pulled Luma out just before the construct collapsed. She woke up gasping, her arms trembling. But her eyes were calm. She's free, Luma said. Or what's left of her is. She gave it to me. Aria nodded. And for the first time since arriving, Luma didn't look fractured. She looked whole. A week later, Aria visited her in the therapy wing. Luma was painting. A canvas full of colors. Wild, chaotic, beautiful. I still remember everything, she said, but now I get to decide what it means. She pointed to a shape in the corner. A small girl standing in a field of
Yeah.
That's me, she said. All of me. Even the parts that hurt. Aria smiled softly. What will you do now? Luma shrugged. Maybe teach memory differently. Not as a burden, but as a bridge. She dipped her brush again. then looked up. Want to help me paint the next one? The file wasn't supposed to exist. After the black site was destroyed, Aria believed that chapter was closed. Prototype 0, rescued, healed, and now studying quietly at the forge, had begun to live. But then a signal pinged the forge satellite uplink. A neural signature, one that matched Zero's perfectly. But it wasn't coming from her. It came from a psychiatric institution carved into a cliffside in the Carpathian Mountains. The encryption embedded in the signal was ancient sovereign code, pre-Basilisk, before Nova, before the restructuring, before Aria. Only one tag was attached: root node active. Prototype 0 Prime. Ren and Mira met Aria in the war room at dawn. No records of this place exist, Mira said, pulling up grainy satellite images. It's not on any public map, and the building design predates known sovereign facilities by at least 15 years. Ren frowned. Whoever's down there, they're either the source of everything, or the last loose thread. Aria turned toward the window. She didn't speak, didn't have to. They were going in. The facility was buried into the cliff, its facade hidden behind what looked like a crumbling monastery. Inside, however, was a labyrinth of metal corridors and reinforced cell blocks. No guards, no patients, just silence. Too much silence. They moved cautiously, every step echoing. Downward, through cold stone halls where time had stopped, but something deeper kept ticking. Then they found the chamber. Not a room, a vault. Glass walls curved around a single reclining chair, bolted into the floor. Electrodes dangled from the ceiling like puppet strings. In the center sat a woman, or what was left of her, mid-40s, shaved head, skin pale from decades without sunlight. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, just a moment, Aria saw herself. She stepped closer. "You're 0 Prime," Aria said. The woman's lips cracked into a faint smile. "Incorrect." She pointed a trembling hand at Aria. "You are." The word shattered something inside Aria. "I don't understand." The woman gestured toward the console beside her, a rusted blinking relic. Ren tapped the screen. Files spilled across it. Logs, brain scans, interrogation records. Subject 00 Prime, Aria Vale origin. Encrypted. Transfer. Genesis lineage prototype 04DX. == memory replacement. Overlay false childhood. Injected. See caretaker loop 7. Primary objective. Empathic weaponization. Emotional override program note. Do not allow mirror contact with source model. Termination risk. High. No. Aria breathed. The woman stood slowly. "I'm what was left when they erased you," she whispered. "They used me to simulate empathy. They extracted it, programmed it, but they couldn't contain it." She touched her own temple. "So they split it. You were the part that fought." Mira stepped forward. "That's not possible. Aria was born. She. No. The woman said. She had memories. Not origins. Not a life. A simulation. Until she broke it." Aria's hands trembled. "I'm not real." "You are now," the woman said. "Because you chose who to be, not who they built." The vault trembled. A fail-safe was triggering. Ren's screen lit up red. Facilities wired to collapse. 10 minutes. Aria looked at the woman. "You're coming with us." The woman shook her head. "I'm the signal. The node. If I leave, the copy activates." "What copy?" Ren cursed. "There's a full clone of her brain running on a hidden network. AI synthetic fusion. If she disconnects, it boots. If it boots, Sovereign reboots." Mira stepped forward. "So she's the kill switch." The woman smiled faintly. "You burned the world they made. Let me keep it dark." Aria stepped forward, shaking her head. "There's got to be another way." "There isn't." Her voice was soft, peaceful. "You were the only part of me that could survive outside. Let me give you this." Aria's eyes filled. Then the woman pressed a final command. Terminate loop. Purge all copies. Lock core. She looked at Aria one last time. Live for both of us. The team ran. They barely cleared the outer wall before the vault collapsed, imploding inward in a final breath of dust and memory. No explosion, just silence. Back at the forge, Aria walked alone through the garden. Mira found her near the olive tree. She was you, Mira said softly. No, Aria replied. I was made from her. But now, I'm more. She pulled out a small cube from her coat pocket, salvaged before they escaped. Inside was the last fragment of the source model's memory. Not data, just sound. A lullaby. One Aria somehow remembered, though she'd never heard it before. She planted a new tree that evening, beside the olive, a sapling with silver-green leaves. This is for her, she whispered. For the peace they buried. Mira placed a hand on her shoulder. And for the ones who refused to stay buried. Epilogue. 10 years later, the forge hosted its largest summit. Hundreds of survivors. Dozens of nations represented. New policies born, not from statistics but from memory. Aria stood at the back of the crowd. She didn't speak. But one by one, those she saved stood for her. Mira, Luma, Ren, Zero's memory, and Eden, now leading the archive, stood beside a new generation. In her keynote, she said we were trained to forget. But we chose to remember. Because memory in the right hands is not pain. It is power. And our story, our truth will never be erased again. And somewhere beyond the noise, Aria walked through a garden full of trees. Each planted for someone forgotten. Each blooming, stubbornly in the sun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.